For listeners, this is the first episode of a new Pioneer series featuring our venture partners. Pioneer invests primarily in top YC companies, and over time, we've built a venture partner network of experienced founders, operators, and domain experts. They help us make better investment decisions, and they work closely with our portfolio companies. This series is a way to share what they've learned, the founder lessons, hard-won instincts, and specific superpowers each VP brings to the table. And today's guest is one of the most technically formidable founders in that network. Ryan is our first guest of this series. He actually kind of helped me think of launching it. It's been amazing over the years seeing Ryan deliver some great advice to founders through email, some battle-hardened advice and some playbooks, and realize gosh, there's so many wonderful venture partners on our network. How do we take this one-to-one conversation they're having with founders and hopefully bring it one to many? So here we are trying. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. So a little bit about myself. So Ryan McLinko, co-founder, CTO of Astranis. My background goes back basically all the space things. Sort of going back to school, aerospace engineering degrees from MIT. Worked at some of the launch field companies for internships. Then was at Sierra Nevada Corporation, working flight control systems. Went to Planet Labs for doing kind of all the things for their CubeSats. So like a monotonic decrease in company size, kind of at the time that I was going. And then I'd known my co-founder, John Gedmark, for a while. And we realized that we wanted to start something that was, important and impactful and in space. And we saw all of these different companies building smaller, faster, cheaper spacecraft, including my current employer, Planet, at the time. And we wanted to apply that to telecoms. And so that's really what the inspiration for Astranis was taking that. And so you don't have to have these giant, big school bus sized satellites and geostationary that are the only things that are providing telecommunication services. And then that's what we've been doing.
Wonderful. And that journey took you through YC and ultimately becoming a partner of our network at Pioneer Fund. I guess looking back at that YC experience, what was the biggest lesson or aha moment that you had going through YC?
Yeah, one of the interesting things was one of the things that they pushed on us, and I assume that they still do, is the focus. And there's a million things that you can be doing when starting a company. There's like a million things that go into starting a company, but there's only so many things you can do at a time. And right. So they really pushed on focus down to one thing or two things. I guess they let us have two things. And for us, for our things to do for demo day, we're focused around build a demonstration CubeSat, basically a prototype of what we then ship to space, or what we call demo sat. Naming things is not something I excel at. And then two was booking a launch for that. And so those are basically the two things that we had as our focus. Obviously, there's obviously a million other things of like customer development and all this other technology, like for the commercial satellite and things like that. But the sort of like thing was when I heard that, I was like, that's impossible. We can't focus on there's like so much things that go into that. But then after like exercising through that with them, realizing, okay, yes, even for us, it is true. We can boil it down to the one or two things and really focus on that for demo day.
That's great. Yeah, maybe unpack that a bit more. Like, what was that conversation like? Like, to your point, like just stripping it down to the main things to focus on to get that goal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it boiled down. I don't remember the details of the conversations, to be honest, but I think it boiled down to like, what are the things that you're really trying to focus on for demo day? And a lot of those really are tied around things that enable you to show that you, as a small team that just recently started existing as a team and as a company and all of that, can do a lot of things very impressively with a small amount of money and a small amount of time. And then we were like able to really show that we were able to do that in those 3 months, because we had incorporated as a company not long before starting YC. Ideifying for some amount of time before that, but I think that's sort of like because what we prove at demo day as a hard tech company different than necessarily what a typical YC company, where it's show the hockey stick.
Right.
I wish we could have shown the hockey stick of revenue 3 months in, but for us it was a little different. It was the proof that we can go build this thing, because if we can build it, then there's a massive market there.
Right. So I guess speaking of that, there's obviously the forcing function of demo day. and the part of advice to like focus on one, maybe two things, as you said, for hard tech founders, people that, you know, aren't necessarily signing up traction from a customer standpoint. Like how should they think about that? Like accomplishing traction and like communicating traction to, you know, potential investors.
Yeah, I think there's also a range of what types of hard tech it is. Obviously, there's like certain things, like
Right.
a telecoms type thing, or a company making power, or these days making data centers. Like it's kind of evidence that if you build it, then there's going to be a massive market there. Now, that said, even at that point, there is still are you building the thing that people will buy?
Right. Right.
You know, us leasing bandwidth. Okay, well, that's obviously a thing, but you know, will people buy that from a couple people in an apartment? And are we building the right form factors? Like our whole thing was building a different form factor of the spacecraft. And so we did need to get some alignment on that being the right thing. And I think that's probably true for various other ones as well. That said, there's other categories I can imagine of hard tech companies where it's not necessarily evident, like what is the thing that you buy or things like that. And so for certain other ones, I think there is more of a customer engagement proof of, okay, this is the right thing to buy. If it's not, you know, something that's more closer to the Maslow hierarchy.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So, I guess getting back to the founding story, you know, what are some common misconceptions, I guess, about founding a company that you think people who are thinking about starting a company have, or you know, people are just early in the journey?
Yeah, a whole bunch of them. The one I think that I realized most strongly most early on was just how much, even if you've been at startups before, how much you took for granted that just existed.
Ah,
So I had joined Planet when it's like, I don't know, 45th employee or something like that. So like
okay.
a small company, not a 5-person company, but like still a small company. And even in that point, and I was the, you know, go poke around all the things sort of person, but like then going from that to starting Astranis with, you know, from nothing, um, realizing how much of just like, even just like the simple things that you don't think about of like, I don't know, getting legal documents, or just like, how do you sign up for Google Drive as an organization as opposed to as a person? Just like all these different like little things, and just the sheer number of those, I think was surprising to me. And there's a lot of support structure, especially with YC, to like give you the playbook of like how
Right,
I think
right.
user's manual or something that it's called, to like help you with that. But just the sheer amount of that was something that was surprising to me on the like very, you know, outset bit of it.
Interesting. That's great. I'm having like flashbacks of my founding journey. To your point, I'm like, yeah, well, you know, setting up your Microsoft accounts and Google accounts, just like the registering the domain and getting things going. That's great. So, I guess next question is like, what do you, Ryan, or your company Astranis do that's different than most?
Yeah, so we have this interesting, unique bit of, like I said, at the time, it was specifically telecoms with smaller spacecraft.
Hmm.
Um, then you have some of these like Leo constellations, stuff like that coming along, and in low Earth orbit, which do a certain thing. It gets you lower latency and just like precision coverage with a massive constellation. But in higher orbit, you have that with one spacecraft. And especially with kind of how the times are going, with people wanting dedicated access and sovereignty and stuff like that, is all something that's
Yeah.
becoming increasingly important over time. Um, I think that's kind of the core advantage of having this smaller spacecraft, so smaller quantum, meaning you don't have to go spend hundreds of millions of dollars up front in order to go acquire this thing, but you can get that service with a single one, or, you know, a few more things like that. And so it's interesting that that's sort of like, I guess you imagine like a 2x2 kind of matrix, that we still seem pretty unique in that sort of quadrant. Um,
Hmm.
there's interesting other bits that are also still kind of unique of us being that integrated provider of both build the satellite, build bus, in spacecraft parlance. The payload is the sort of business end that has the radios and the amplifiers and stuff like that, and the bus is the rest. I think the power systems, avionics, structure, things like that. So doing those two together, but also getting financing and then handling that sort of side and operating the spacecraft and then taking that leasing capacity. And a lot of the newer entrants that are building other spacecraft that are intended even for higher orbits are actually not doing that full stack side of it. And that inspiration actually came a lot from, for example, my previous employer, Planet, where the whole thing that Planet and Skybox and that sort of cohort of companies per se was doing was that previously, all the traditional imaging spacecraft where you'd have Boeing or whatever go make a spacecraft, and then they would lease it to a separate company that then operates the spacecraft and takes the pictures and sells those pictures to government or whatever, and then sort of like that goes up. But like the reason that existed was because traditionally the only people who built spacecraft were defense contractors, and defense contractors all came up in a time where like leasing that capacity. Well, A, spacecraft can only be hundreds of millions of dollars. B, there's like what, and so therefore you need to be set up in a way that you just have to take the money up front as you need it. And the idea of leasing that or financing that ahead of time just like wasn't tractable. And so, but if your spacecraft costs order of magnitude less than that, now it's tractable for you to basically finance these things and sort of go out, and then you get to capture kind of the full upside for that. Also, you get to talk directly to the customers, and you can make sure you're providing the right thing, as opposed to this weird sort of like flow down process.
Very interesting. So it's kind of a two-part question, I guess, like kind of interesting the business model with Astranis and like what you guys have developed for tech, and how that's evolved for yourself, I guess, as like a founder and leader within a growing organization. Like what do you do differently, I guess, that distinguishes you perhaps from others, your co-founders or other founders that you've interacted with?
I think how I approach things, which isn't necessarily distinguished with other founders, but I think a distinguisher for how most people think is just like, and I think it's probably a thing that uniquely founders have, is just the ability to digest a like the whole like how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time and just sort of like go through it, is an ability to sort of like digest that into what are all the different things. And the way that I think about stuff tends to be here's this like massive problem, and you're like, okay, well, how do you like design a spacecraft? Okay, well, how do you go do that? Okay, well, we just a breadth first, and then just sort of like diving into each different bits. And so like designing the first satellite was, start with a spreadsheet, and just like built a parametric model and sort of like work down, and then based on the things that I'm least confident about, dive into those things first and sort of like go into further depth. And that turns into analytical models, the different things. And so just like the sort of like breadth and depth, kind of like diving into different stuff. And obviously then that grows into a team of people doing different bits and stuff like that. But starting from the very get-go of just like the really rough initial sizing of just a like, how do you attack a big problem? You just one step at a time.
Yeah. So how did, like, as your team grows, I guess, like, how have you thought about like instilling that mindset in the team? Like, is it naturally there? Do people have to come upon it themselves, or like can it be taught?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think example is the best way to show. And so certainly early on in my company, that sheet that I think was called spacecraft parametric sizer or something was just like a thing that everybody had access to in there. Like everybody, all the like first set of each of the disciplines contributed to it. And so we don't have that particular sheet anymore to like exist in other ways. But when you're at the outside of an early part of design, we certainly like bring up something like that and then have people kind of look at that. And I've even gone back and shown people that example from like forever ago of like, hey, here's how I did this before. Like, let's just do this again.
Right. Interesting. So, taking a step back in your career a little bit, like you, aerospace, mechanical background, taught yourself electrical engineering a bit, sort of more mid-career, I guess. Can you talk a bit about that journey?
Yeah. So, I had a couple of degrees in aerospace engineering, which can mean various different things. For me, it was I'm excited about space, and so I want to get this degree. In reality, you probably only want to get aerospace engineering degree if you're like propulsion or thermals type stuff. I probably should have gotten mechanical and electrical degrees instead, but like, whatever. But I was most interested in mechanical. And so that's what my internships and then my first job were basically strictly mechanical. Because I just like the part where you bring it all together. Also, I thought I really liked finite element analysis, like math behind it and like pulling together and stuff like that. And so like that also is interesting to me. And so I tended to focus on mechanical side because of those reasons. And then I was exposed, going to smaller and smaller companies, exposed to more things. And I ended up actually leading not only the mechanical team, but also the electrical team at Planet. And so that got me exposed. I was also sort of joined as a go find the problems and solve the problems. And so that necessarily exposed me to all the things, which is obviously a great intro to then starting a company. And then early in Astranis, we just like weren't finding as many, we set a super high bar. And we just weren't necessarily finding the right fit for some like hardware, electrical engineer type people. And I was like, oh, I just wanted to do this myself anyway, and we have a need. And so we found, basically, we had this contractor that somebody recommended who's great. But rather than have them design these circuit boards for a demo set, is basically, okay, why don't I design them and then have them design review it? And so that basically allowed me to close the iteration loop. So we weren't having to have the iteration loop be on get the circuit boards back and obviously them not work because I didn't know what I was doing, but rather go look at all these data sheets, find all these reference schematics and stuff like that. Then capture that in Altium, send it to the contractor, him bleed all over that, make the changes, go do layout, send that to him, give him the massive list of all the things they did wrong, and then we'll go bring it up. And then obviously there's still some things that caught through, and then iterate from there.
That experience, and I guess a bunch of experiences at bigger companies going small, like lots of opportunity and surface area to like learn lessons and bring them into your experience. Like, can you think of something that jumped out? I guess like learning a lesson the hard way. Is there a story there that you think would be shareable?
Yeah, also so many of them. One that I think comes to mind, just like on thinking more of the systems kind of approach again, is aerospace is sort of riddled through the like, here's your margin, here's your like margin stacked on margin and stuff like that, and that's like why everything turns out to be massive and huge and expensive, and that is true. But I decided to take maybe the more totally opposite approach early on. Let's not do any of that. Current best estimate, CBE as people call it. Like let's just assume the current best estimate, and we'll just roll that up through all these filters, whether we're talking about mass, whether we're talking about cost, whether we're talking about schedule. And that's good in that it doesn't have the like, it's going to come because you said there's margin, therefore there is the margin, because like you say you need this, then this system needs the extra this, and then this system needs, and so you get this vigorous loop. So yes, we had less of that going, but on the other hand, there was just legitimate uncertainty and in all these things. And it's not even necessarily that the margined values of those components we should have even used for the design, because like I think I was probably right to some degree. But the problem is if you're using only those current best estimates, then you're sort of like out of sight, out of minding a lot of the like what the uncertainty is. Or if there's things that just have higher uncertainty, and you have that like, well, this has higher uncertainty for this line. Well, maybe I should just go spend a lot more time on this line to go burn that down. Versus like if you just have current best estimate there, then it's not as obvious that you need to really dig into this line because that's the one that you don't understand as much. And so, obviously, the mass and the cost and the number of people we had and all that to get our first satellite operational is more than we expected. That was going to be true even if I, had done the best possible version of this.
Right.
I think maybe because like the decisions that you make for, a thing of this size versus a thing that's 1.3x that size might be different. And so I think maybe there could have been some less iterations, or maybe could have put something more optimal or something if I had taken maybe a slightly different approach on that.
So is that like where to focus your energy and where have the biggest impact and where to not focus your energy because it's like diminishing returns?
Yeah, I think a lot of it came to, what is the, like I said, of the like breadth and depth, but maybe how I should have focused. Like there might have been better choices in the breadth versus depth choices that I could have highlighted better and had better visibility to myself. Had I like been able to highlight those sort of things of where is the uncertainty more clearly to myself.
Right. So as we think about, that's in building the tech and building the products and lessons there from a company building feat, like getting company off the ground, like, what would you hail as the hardest, hardest thing to do?
Communication. Actually, two things. And I think I was going to dig into one of these other ones, but I'll go into this one first. So there's building an amazing team, which is obviously like the core thing, but I think we'll get back to that later. The other one is just communication. And communication is hard. Talking is hard. And when you're a handful of people working together, it's easy. If you have good people, it's easy. But there's this point, and I've talked to a bunch of other founders about this, and this is apparently incredibly crisp. So it must be somebody that's like programmed to do how our brains work. That around mid-30s number of people in a company. If you have less than that and you have good people, it just comes for free. Everybody knows the same things, what's going on. Everybody knows what's going on. Everybody's on the same page. Everybody is aligned. Like all that sort of stuff just like kind of comes for free. But then above that, even if you have the great people, then it doesn't come for free anymore. And you can still have all of that, but you have to put a lot of proactive effort into that, whether that is how you structure meetings, how you structure communicating that thing out to people. How do you handle, because like not everybody can sit around the same table at the same time. Like, when we're a small company, we all had lunch together around this table, and especially it's easy when there's a dozen of you, or just like how you do like weekly updates or updates in any other cadence, and just like how do you structure that information in your Google Drive, in your Confluence, in your Notion, and like whatever, how you store your company documentation.
Mm-hmm.
And the other, like, further to make matters worse, and I wonder maybe this will change with AI and how things like size, because people can do more with less, but like at least in our time, you tended to blow through that mid-30s number. Like you'd stick around as a single digits number of company for a while, and then you slowly edge up to those teens and 20s, but then oftentimes you probably just like, and this is just how rounds are structured or whatever, that like you tend to raise around, you're in those like 20s number of people, and then therefore you blow past that to the high 10s, and then it's not like you got to 40 and then you're like fixing it. It's that you got to 80 and you're like, oh crap, what happened?
Yeah.
And so just like that much more, like these things are all recoverable, like we figured it out, but it's just like it's more friction than it needs to be if you hadn't
for sure. And it's hard to plan for in advance, right? Because it's like all the burning fires that you're dealing with, like forward thinking on your communication structure is challenging. And I would even think like, especially in remote async, like that number of like mid-30s, you could almost like cut that in half, just because like the added friction of not being able to grab lunch together. It's probably 10 to 15 people. It starts to get complex.
Sure. Yeah.
And so yeah, no, interesting lesson there. I guess like from a company building standpoint, was that like, that it sounded somewhat not completely unexpected. I think in theory, you in chatting with other founders, you knew that would happen. I guess, was there like,
I had those conversations after actually.
So, but like, was there another unexpected challenge? Like, communication's interesting, but was there another one where it was just like, oh wow, this, quite a challenge. It really changed the trajectory of like, not necessarily Astranis, but like you in your role and you as a founder.
I mean, a related thing to that is just as a founder, you almost have like a new job every year or two. And I guess that maybe expands out as the company grows. Like early on, it was like a new job every 3 months, and then like later on, it's a new job every year, and now it's like, I guess, a new job every few years or whatever. And I guess how that looks like, and then just like how that works in terms of your relationship with your team and all that sort of stuff, and how that changes. Like it certainly was weird getting to the point where it's like you don't know everybody at the company, and or this thing where it's like, I've seen that person before, I don't know them, or I used to have a one-on-one with every single person at the company. That obviously stopped at a certain point, but then at least and so there's like certain other ranges of like, I at least am involved in interviewing every management position, and so I at least am no more than one degree of separation away from a relationship with people at the company. But like how to like maintain that sort of like, because like I feel like one of the core things is how do you keep as much of the capability that you have as a small team, but then able to scale that. And obviously that like that's really like, I guess, the core challenge for how a lot of these things go, because most of the time it's not done right. And so how can we do it as most bright as possible? But there was, I guess, the amount of how that sort of like changes, and just like and also just like unexpected friction, or just like people not, like when you're a small company, like everybody's comfortable come to me and like say a thing. But like when you're a 500 person company, well, there's obviously people that have relationships that do, and then there's certain people that are just like, they started here now, but there's a person who's going to come talk to me. Great. But then there's the normal third person who just isn't that way. And how do you make the door clearly open? And a lot of that's just like kind of talking to the teams and stuff like that. But also it's definitely not a solved problem.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think like, I experienced that too with previous startup as it grew, like, the power dynamics kind of shifted, especially with new hires. Whereas, you want to have an open door and like anybody should be able to knock on it, but it's hard to calibrate people and new hires to be like, it's okay, like do this. And to your earlier point on communication, like, a key point of having that happen. And the thing that keeps, I guess, with your comments keep jumping in my head is like, again, is like, you kind of hit 30 people, communication starts to change. And it's also like, there's a period in there too, it feels like, where like each new person you add, it actually feels like it's slowing down the business versus speeding things up. And I think that probably relates to, partially to communication. Well, it does certainly relate to communication, but As I say that, like, certainly on the team building stuff, any other takeaways, I guess, as you went through that journey?
Kind of, there's a bunch on the hiring side of things. We very early on set an incredibly high bar. I think some of the credit, a lot of the credit came to some of our first, actually our first hire, and basically bringing to some of the stuff from Google that they did, of just like how to really like. I look back and just like the level of diligence and things that we ask candidates to do is kind of mind blowing, especially for us to just like a couple people.
Do you have an example, a story or example if you could share?
So for electrical engineers, we made them design a buck converter, a power converter with a microcontroller. You can't use the normal power management ICs. You design a converter with a microcontroller, and so because then you write the PWM loop in it, and then have the pins do that, and they would make a board. I would get so they would send me the design files for the board. I would go get it made. I would then hand load them because it was too cheap to get it assembled by a CM. So I would hand load the parts, which is a whole separate story on that. And then they would get in and they would have to bring it up as part of the interview. And wow. The bar wasn't necessarily that it gets all working awesome. It's just like, okay, well, do we see that they did? And there's like a similar project to other disciplines too. Just like these like very significant projects that we had people do, which are great signal. But also the questions, and also just like what our expectations were, both on the technical side, but also on just like the personality side of like, because there's a lot of talented assholes out there. It's like, okay, that's cool, not for us. And that's not a decision that all companies make. And so I think just like keeping the bar high in all those different areas, which makes it hard to hire, but like that's fine.
How did you deal with that? I'm sure there's the friction within the team of like, oh gosh, we need like 10 new bodies, and like, keeping the bar high, there's inherently a tension there. Like how did you guys work through that to make sure you kept the bar high?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it was, at least with the early team, I mean, the upside is that people, once they're here for a little bit, they see the benefit. There's like, wow, this is just like such a higher concentrated horsepower team than anything that I've experienced before. The only difficulty is with the new hires, I guess, because they don't necessarily see the proof of that. Although I guess oftentimes they do see some of that, because we've had a lot of feedback that we get in the hiring process. Like, wow, there's like the panel that interviewed me just seems like crazy good. But like, yeah, I think most of the tension tended to exist for the newer employees who don't necessarily see the why, or for new hires who just don't have a basis of it, new grads who don't necessarily have the basis experience of, oh, this is not normal.
Right. This is what great looks like. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair on calibrating them. Interesting. So kind of moving around there a little bit back to, I guess, Astranis and your experience there. I guess, maybe walk us through a bit of the story. Like, what did you see in the industry that was going wrong that you believed in a small team in an apartment could actually compete with some very, very big players and incumbents?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the thing that we saw differently was that all these spacecraft are building these, or all these companies are building these big school bus size satellites that take many years to build, many hundreds of millions of dollars to build. And the cool thing was that we saw this change already happening on the remote sensing and low Earth orbit side, like including my previous employer at the time, Planet, who was building these spacecraft. I mean, Planet was building CubeSats, 3D CubeSats, to replace these kind of big giant ones, admittedly at like much lower resolution. So it's like a different feature set to some extent, but they're also building somewhat larger ones, but also at like a better resolution. And so like, it's not necessarily quite the same as the resolution of the SpySats, but for a lot of the applications, it's good enough. And so there was a proof point to some extent of, them and Skybox and all of that doing this in a different way. And so that's part of where I think the confidence came from was this is working for a different industry. Well, let's apply it to an even bigger industry, and sort of like take that. And, they also came out of an apartment or whatever, a garage.
Yeah.
And so we can do the same thing here for this larger market.
So with that, I guess like that, often, you chat with young founders looking for ideas or like pivoting through ideas, like, maybe if you kind of share a bit more of like when that idea like really hit you, like, this seems so obvious. Why is this not being solved? Was it a function of you just being deep in the space and kind of eyes wide open, constantly looking around, or like how did that idea get stumbled upon?
Yeah, I think it was basically that. It was just like looking around the space of like what is missing, and you just sort of look one of those like 2x2 matrices, and you're like, wait, it's so hard to get access to these things, and like geo orders are decreasing over time because like they're so expensive, take so long, and all this sort of stuff. And but in this other adjacent market, there is a new way that seems to be happening, and so like, oh, we can figure out, we can fill in the other quadrants of that graph, which is not currently being done.
Right. Okay. And to your credit, lots of curiosity and your head on a swivel, it feels like, looking around. So, after 8 years of building, first commercial satellite went into live orbit. Must have felt amazing. Maybe, yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah. That obviously the build for 8 years, lots of stuff happened in there, but when it finally, kind of, reaches orbit, how did that feel for you?
Yeah, I mean, and I would put it particularly on the achieving service, and basically getting in line for service and receiving first, payment for that lease bandwidth.
Yes,
pretty great and exciting to like, finally get that sort of like coming full circle. At least the first bit of the full circle happening was great. Of course, it's not quite the same as I don't know, a rocket launch where it's like, okay, job done.
Right.
It's then, okay, we did that. Now keep doing it for the next 7 to 10 years. And so it's not quite the same like relief element that you might have from a more,
well, which is interesting. Like, how does it, your founder heads down for 8 years trying to get something going, you reach that milestone, and then like there's just more in front of you. And so like, how, I guess, have you done a good job, or like in taking the time to like reflect upon like, wow, look what we did, and like making sure to, take a step back on occasion? I've certainly found through my founder journey, sometimes it's like you get it, you celebrate for like 10 minutes and then you just go right back to work. And I don't know what the right balance is, but like, how has your team approached that?
How do I approach that? Definitely the same thing you described. We takes time with the team to celebrate the wins and like make sure that we're going through and doing stuff. Because there's obviously, it's a marathon and you got a bunch of stuff sort of going through. And you got to make sure that, and I think there's like different mindsets. Like me, just do the cool, we had a win, like go find the next one. Like my brain doesn't work in that way, that like go, I don't know, whatever. But like we have a lot of people at the company that do need that and like do value that. And so we want to make sure that we're providing, some amount of that to people for sure. Even if it's not for me.
Yeah, no, fair enough. It's not, we're kindred spirits on how we're wired there. Many years in space tech, it's hard. So, it kind of begs the question, I guess, like, what unit of time matters most to you and why?
Yeah, probably days. It's like, you measure it in seconds, minutes, hours. Like there are certain things. Actually, we design our systems such that the vehicles will safe themselves in just like minutes, seconds, like, and then the operators can intervene later. Like if we've designed it such that the human operator on the ground has to do a thing, or even in a chamber asset that we have in production within seconds, or even like a minute, then we designed the system wrong. It needs to safe itself and then allow us to intervene over the course of, more minutes to hours.
Right.
And then obviously in the design side, like minutes and hours isn't going to make a huge thing, but like the amount that you can accomplish in a day is significant. And whether it's, an operate thing, whether it's design thing, it's unfortunate when people sort of like think about it. Oh, well, let's catch up on the next Tuesday thing. Okay. But it's Wednesday. So like,
yeah.
And so anything longer than that, I feel like is obviously there's like tasks that take longer, where it's like, yes, you're going to wait for this for a vendor for 4 months. Or like the circuit board is going to come back in, 3 weeks or whatever. But like you can measure things at some in quanta, I think, in days for the most part.
Mm-hmm. And how have you operationalized that? I guess like you spoke to, like, we've all been victim of the meeting where it's like, okay, see you next week to report on progress, and half the progress got done and it's not moving as fast. Like, how have you operationalized that, like personally, and then also for Astranis?
Yeah, I mean, I personally hate status meetings. I feel like statuses should be shared in some different way. Like getting a bunch of
Right,
resources,
100%.
like highly inefficient for that. But also just like really, and I think again, this is one of these things where you have just like, you obviously have to have a mix of people who joined when the company is small. Just like, don't think of that as wait for the status meeting. But we also have a lot of people who come from larger companies or like just don't have a basis because they're a new grad or something like that. And so then it's just, you need to instill these things to people. If they like, okay, well, time is of the essence. You have a thing, then go get the question answered. But like, don't wait for a meeting for that to be a thing.
So I guess, is there a unit of time that you hate the most?
Quarters.
Okay, speak more. Quarters, yes.
I feel like the only time I see quarters are in like, I don't know, formal financial reports or government assessments of when a NASA launch is happening or something. And
right.
Like, at the very least, I mean, say a month. But also like, if you say that something's happening in Q4, okay, just say December 31st and be done with it. So like, it's just like this weird middle ground thing of like, sure, there's certain things where you can say a year is like a thing.
Right.
Or things where you can say a month.
But it's like this false precision of a quarter, which isn't precise at all. I guess.
Like, I can think of no good use of when one should use a quarter.
That's awesome. All right. Okay. Gotcha. So hugely ambitious stuff you're doing. You mentioned measuring stuff in days and having clarity on progress. Like, how do you balance that ambition with being patient?
Carefully.
I like the thoughtful smile before you responded. Yeah. What? Carefully. What do you mean?
Yeah. I mean, I guess the ambition is obviously required for any founders, but at the same time, anything worth doing is obviously not going to be easy and not going to be fast, especially for hard tech founders. And so obviously there's some amount of patience of some degree. Not that I would describe myself as being a particularly patient person, but there's obviously some degree of that is required. Otherwise, you're just going to get pissed off and frustrated and like give up. So how to manage that? I don't know, just like some combination of finding the steps of there's many steps that are sort of getting on there and celebrating some sort of those wins. And I guess I'm sort of the type of person who values the accomplishments of the milestone achievement. It's not even celebrating it. It's just like achieve the thing, level up. And so I think that's probably the thing that I personally, I think most benefit from is just like, okay, well, we released this circuit board, we achieved this test state, we achieved this and there might be 1,000 steps in that process, but at least if you're like making a cadence of steps, then and you make sure those steps are actually valuable. Because that's a separate trap of making steps, but the steps are actually not useful, but just feeling like you're getting a sense of accomplishment.
Interesting aside, I guess, that the trap of what busy work, which feels like progress but isn't progress. I guess, have you guys tripped across that yourself at Astranis or in previous lives? I guess, how have you prevented that?
There's definitely been lots of little things. I mean, especially where you're putting in process is a double-edged sword. On one hand, process is the most valuable thing that you as a company will create. Because how you operate as a business is the most important. You have your team and then you've got process, and those are kind of the most important things. And nobody likes talking about this. People don't like talking about process, but it's actually the most important thing, even if you're probably it's subliminal of that you've actually created, is how you're doing this, because that's what probably differentiates you from your competitors. It's not the IP you're creating. It's not the SolidWorks drawings or whatever. It's how you made those drawings. That is actually what's important. But on the other hand, a lot of times process can be sort of this impediment thing where you're just creating the thing because it felt like that would be useful. And so constantly reiterating, and there's the formula, the Elon thing of the question the requirements, question the thing, and make it more efficient is actually the last step.
Yeah.
And so are you doing those right things? And a lot of times, you're sort of doing yourself a disservice by necessarily putting something. So thinking carefully about what are the right things to be doing.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've approached it as Pioneer Fund as an organization, but in previous lives too, is sort of continue sort of Elon Musk sort of views on this is the delete button. You can delete process, and if it turns out you need it, it's easy enough to add back. But once it's added in and more process gets built on top of more process, it I don't want to speak with hyperbole, but it's a little bit cancerous, right? It can expand pretty quickly in an organization. So, so looking, back to the trend of space and the space, and the space you're building in, what do you see as the next big trends in your industry over the next few years?
Space data centers, apparently.
Okay. Do you think there's a sleeper one where like people are missing? Like obviously space data centers, lots of conversation on that, but if, is there?
It's a thing that I've been thinking about a lot of like, what is the next like opener to space? And I feel like it has to be resource utilization. Like, what is after comms? Like, comms is the biggest thing right now. And always has been, basically. Ever since really the beginning of space, like, comms has been the main thing. Like, there's Earth's observation and stuff like that. But, like, those have never been. And so I feel like it's got to be resource utilization, asteroid mining, maybe moon mining, or, like, I don't know, things like that of, like, somehow getting items that either are impractical or have been such a quantity or something from elsewhere, I feel like has got to be the next like draw to like get to that in the next level.
Gotcha. So related to that, I guess, like if there's one invention you hope to see in your lifetime, what would that be? Maybe that has nothing to do with space. Maybe
fusion power.
Maybe somewhere else. Fusion power.
I think that fusion power, like, so obviously background excitement about space stuff, but like my next kind of like level of or next set of things that I think just like fundamentally interest me are energy in general, like energy generation. Whether that's, we need to do way more fission because like that's actually great. We know where fusion is like for on like geothermal, like all these things, like cool solar, we're doing more things, but like that in itself does not solve humanity's problems. And just like if you can make like fusion unlocks to make power maybe 1% the cost that it is like cost for power, and just like what does that do? It's just like such a massive unlock to things. Like clean water just becomes free because you just evaporate it. Like there's all these things that just like are huge problems for our species that just become non-problems if power is 100th of the cost of what it is right now.
Great ideas there for like, pretty enduring ideas. I guess is like we wrap up, sort of two final questions, based on the conversation we had or just you reflecting as a founder, what's the most critical foundation to building an enduring company?
I think it's the two things that I sort of hinted at before of the team and the process. And basically, because like ultimately a successful company is going to design a great many things and build a great many things and is going to constantly iterate and improve on those things over time in order to stay relevant and stay the best. And so how do you do that? It's not because you have a particular design or a particular technology, because like those are all going to become obsolete shortly if you're doing it right. And so how do you keep finding that new technology or that new process or that new whatever that you're doing is because you have the best people doing it and that you have found some unique insight on the process for how you're doing that, especially if the core thing, like for Astranis, we're like operating in a very harsh environment, geostationary orbit for 10 years, but also go fast. And like, those are fundamentally competing things. And so drawing the line between those is how you do that is the process. And so like any significant startup has a similar sort of probably at least two or maybe more seemingly competing things that they're threading a needle between, and how they figure out how to thread that needle is the process. And so the combination, if you can create those two things, I feel like is the way that you obtain that like continually iterating company that can be an enduring thing.
Gotcha. And I guess with that, like how much have you thought of like, has process been reactive or proactive and like by design, or has it been often like, oh gosh, something went wrong, we need to think about it? Like obviously yours in a very technical and engineering focused space, so perhaps, and maybe my assumption's wrong, I assume a lot of it is by design, but like how should a founder think about that?
Yeah, it's a mix. But I think and the founder needs to be constantly very proactive about it, about creating, but also about deleting and also about modifying, because like a lot of the process maybe was the right process, but it's not the right process now, either because you need to add some or you need to remove some, because a lot of times, and I found this to be the case sometimes, where you added a thing, everybody kind of knew what it meant, even though it wasn't written as clearly. And now people are interpreting it to become something way more. And now the process is like kind of ballooned. You're like, well, no, that's not what we meant. And so you have to kind of reframe it as, oh, actually, we cared about this bit, not this whole thing that this turned into. And so I do think the founders and other just like, core members of the team absolutely need to be constantly evaluating all aspects of that and decide what is the right answer, because what is the right answer will never remain the right answer for long.
Yeah. So constantly, I guess, pruning and deleting process. And I think like important too, I've found it helpful in the past, like to celebrate that pruning and deleting so that like, when, the org team gets bigger and someone's dealing with the process is like, why do we even do this anymore? They get celebrated for putting up their hand of like, let's get rid of it or define it differently.
Yeah.
Sort of. Final sort of somewhat fun question, I guess, if people aren't listening to this podcast, what company builder listening podcast should they be listening to? What are you listening to? Where do you get inspiration or where do you get guidance?
The one I've been listening to lately is Acquired.
Yes.
Two others that I've liked in this order, How I Built This and Founders. And I like them because this like talk through how companies are acquired isn't specifically about acquisitions, by the way. I guess maybe they started that way, but it's actually not.
Right.
But like just like going through and talking about how companies were built and like started. And also it's not, these companies in all three of these podcasts are not specifically Silicon Valley companies. The one on Acquired that I'm listening to right now is about Epic. And just like, there's all these just like super, just like wide range things that are like similar to what I'm interested in, or just like super different. And just like, well, what are the similarities that sort of exist there? And it's really, I don't know, just sort of like put in the back of the brain and sort of like stew on sort of stuff.
No, that's great. That's great. So, well, thanks for being the first guest and helping me think of this idea and get it launched. So thanks for your time and certainly being part of the Venture Partner Network. As mentioned, been super helpful as we've gone through technical diligence of some founders, and then again some great responses to founders looking for help over the years. So yeah, I'll maybe turn it to you if there's any closing thoughts that you'd like to share.
No, I don't think I really have anything else to add. I think we covered a lot of great stuff. Thanks for having me. And this is great.
Awesome, wonderful.